Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step into a place where the horizon feels endless, the wind never quite rests, and the world is held together by rough timber walls and routine. You arrive just as the sun sinks low, painting the plains in a soft orange glow, the kind that makes everything look calm for a moment even when it is not. Dust clings to your boots, your throat feels dry, and somewhere ahead a bugle call drifts through the evening air, thin but unmistakable. You probably won't survive this without learning very quickly how life really works out here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop a comment telling me where you are in the world and what time it is for you right now. It is always nice to know who is out there listening in the quiet. Now dim the lights, you keep walking. The fort rises slowly in front of you, not as a grand structure, but as something practical. Thick wooden walls sharpened at the top, a gate reinforced with iron, watchtowers at the corners where figures move in slow, deliberate patterns. Nothing here is decorative. Everything exists because it must. A widely accepted fact of frontier forts in the 1860s is that most were not built for comfort or even for large battles, but for presence. They marked territory, protected supply lines, and offered a place of relative safety in a landscape that could feel unpredictable. Looking at it now, you can understand that. It does not try to impress you, it tries to endure. As you approach the gate, you notice the sounds first. Horses shifting in their stalls somewhere inside, the murmur of voices, a hammer striking wood in a steady rhythm, and underneath it all the wind moving across the open land, slipping through cracks and gaps never fully kept out. You pause for a moment before entering. There is a smell here that is hard to place at first. Smoke certainly, wood smoke from cooking fires or heating stoves, but also leather sweat-damp earth and something faintly sour, like supplies that have been stored too long. It is not unpleasant exactly, just unfamiliar. A soldier at the gate glances at you, his posture straight but not tense. He looks tired in a way that suggests this is not a temporary feeling. His uniform is worn at the edges, the blue faded slightly by sun and time. You step through. Inside the fort feels both smaller and more crowded than you expected. Buildings line the interior walls arranged with a kind of rough order. Barracks, storehouses, a small hospital, maybe an officer's quarters set slightly apart. The ground is packed dirt, worn smooth by countless footsteps. You notice how everything seems to exist within a narrow range of colour. Browns, greys, faded blues. Even the sky, now deepening toward the evening, feels muted here. A few soldiers pass by you, some carrying tools, others just moving with a slow practiced rhythm. No one rushes. There is no sense of urgency at this exact moment, but there is also no real relaxation. It feels like a place that is always waiting. You hear laughter somewhere to your left. Brief, sharp, then gone. It catches you off guard. For a second it reminds you that life here is not only about survival. People still find ways to be human even in places like this. A lesser-known detail about forts like this is that they often functioned as small communities rather than purely military outposts. Alongside soldiers there were civilians, laundresses who washed uniforms, blacksmiths who repaired tools and horseshoes, sometimes even families, especially for officers. Children might be here too, their presence a quiet contradiction to the harshness of the environment. You spot one now. A small figure near one of the buildings sitting on the ground with something in their hands. Maybe a piece of wood, maybe a toy carved from scraps. The child looks up briefly as you pass, then returns to their quiet activity as if this place is normal to them, and perhaps it is. You keep moving deeper into the fort. The air feels different inside the walls. Not calmer exactly, but contained. The wind still finds its way in, but it loses some of its force. Sounds echo slightly between the buildings, creating a sense of closeness you did not feel out on the open plains. You pass a group of men near a fire. They are seated on rough benches, their shoulders relaxed in a way that suggests the day's work is nearly done. One of them stirs a pot slowly, the contents thick and dark. Another rubs his hands together more out of habit than cold. Food here, you realize, is less about enjoyment and more about necessity. There is a quiet understanding among them. Words are exchanged but sparingly. Long pauses stretch between sentences filled with the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the fort settling into evening. You feel like an observer moving through a space that has its own rhythm, one that does not change just because you have arrived. Some historians still debate whether life in these forts felt more isolating or more communal. On one hand, you're surrounded by the same people every day sharing spacework and hardship. On the other, the distance from the outside world is immense. News arrives daily. Letters take weeks or months. The sense of being cut off can settle in quietly like dust. You think about that as you walk. The sky above you darkens further, stars beginning to appear one by one. Without city lights, they feel closer somehow, brighter, almost overwhelming in their number. You reach the center of the fort and stop! For a moment, everything seems to pause. Not completely. There are still movements, still some sounds, but they soften, blending into a kind of background hum. You notice your own body now, the weight of your steps, the dryness in your mouth, the slight tension in your shoulders. You are here, not as a visitor passing through quickly, but as someone who will have to learn the rules of this place. The routines, the expectations, the small details that determine whether a day feels manageable or exhausting. A bugle sounds again, this time clearer, signaling something you do not yet fully understand. Around you, people respond almost automatically. Some stand, others begin to move towards specific buildings. There is a pattern here. You just have not learned it yet. And as the last light fades from the sky, replaced by the cooler tones of night, you begin to realize that this fort is not just a structure, it is a system, a fragile balance of discipline, cooperation, and endurance. Tomorrow you will wake inside it, but for now you stand in the quiet, listening to the wind trace the edges of the walls, carrying with it the vastness of everything beyond. You follow the slow movement of the others as the last traces of evening settle into night, your steps guided more by instinct than certainty. The air cools quickly now, the warmth of the day slipping away as if it was only ever temporary. A lantern flickers somewhere ahead, casting a soft, uneven glow that pulls your attention forward. The barracks door creaks as it opens, a sound that feels louder than it should in the stillness. You step inside. The first thing you notice is the smell. It is stronger here, enclosed and layered. Wool blankets that have been used for months, leather boots left to dry, the faint trace of smoke clinging to everything, and beneath it all the unmistakable scent of many people sharing a space not meant for comfort. A commonly understood reality of frontier barracks is that they were built quickly and with practicality in mind, not privacy. Soldiers often slept in long rooms lined with bunks, sometimes 2 levels high, each man given only a narrow space to call his own. Looking around now, you can see how little room there is between each bed. You hesitate for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the dim light. The room stretches farther than you expected, rows of wooden bunks extending along both sides. Some are already occupied. Figures sit or lie quietly, their movements slow, as if conserving energy rather than spending it. A few speak in low voices, their words blending together into a soft murmur. You move toward an empty space. The bunk is simple. A wooden frame, a thin mattress stuffed with straw or something similar, and a blanket folded at the foot. You press your hand against it lightly. It feels rough, uneven in places, but not entirely uncomfortable. Just unfamiliar. You sit. The wood creaks slightly under your weight, a small reminder that nothing here is silent for long. Even stillness has its own sound. Nearby, a man shifts in his bunk, pulling his blanket tighter around his shoulders. Another removes his boots, slowly setting them neatly beneath his bed. These small routines seem important, repeated every night perhaps until they become automatic. You follow their example. As you remove your boots, you notice how much dust has gathered on them. Fine, pale dust that has worked its way into every crease and seam. It feels like the land itself has followed you inside. A lesser-known detail about life in these forts is how often soldiers struggled with insects inside the barracks. Fleas, lice, and other small pests thrived in close quarters, especially where bedding was rarely washed thoroughly. You become aware of this possibility as you settle in the thought lingering at the edge of your mind. You lie back slowly, the mattress shifts beneath you, the straw inside adjusting with a soft rustling sound. It is not unpleasant, but it is not the kind of comfort you're used to. Your body takes a moment to find a position that feels steady. Above you, the wooden beams of the ceiling are just visible in the low light. The room does not go quiet all at once. Instead, the sounds fade gradually. Conversations end mid-sentence. Movements slow. Someone coughs softly in the distance. Another turns over the fabric of his blanket, brushing against itself with a faint whisper. You close your eyes, but sleep does not come immediately. There is too much to notice: the unfamiliar weight of the blanket, the slight chill in the air, the way the sounds of others continue even in rest. Breathing shifting, the occasional quiet sigh. It feels strange to sleep among so many people, each one close enough that you can hear them, yet distant in every other way. You open your eyes again. A lantern still burns at the far end of the room, its light dim but steady. It casts long shadows across the floor, stretching and shifting as the flame moves. For a moment you watch those shadows, letting your mind follow their slow, rhythmic motion. Some accounts from the time suggest that soldiers often found it difficult to fully relax in these environments, especially at first. The constant awareness of others, combined with the uncertainties of frontier life, created a kind of quiet tension that did not disappear easily. Whether that tension faded over time is something historians continue to discuss. You turn onto your side. The wood of the bunk presses lightly against your shoulder. It grounds you in a way. A physical reminder that you are here inside this structure part of this system now. From outside, faint sounds drift in. The distant stamp of a horse, the low murmur of a voice on watch, the wind, always the wind, brushing against the walls and slipping through small gaps. You begin to notice a pattern in these sounds. They are not random. They repeat in subtle ways. The same rhythm of footsteps, the same creak of wood, the same distant movement beyond the walls. It is as if the fort itself breathes slow and steady. You focus on that rhythm. Your breathing begins to match it almost without thinking. In then out, slow, measured. The tension in your shoulders eases slightly. A man nearby mutters something in his sleep. Another shifts again, the bunk creaking in response. These interruptions no longer feel as sharp. They blend into the background part of the larger pattern. Time passes, though it is hard to measure how much. At some point the lantern is dimmed further, its light shrinking, until it is little more than a soft glow. The room grows darker, the shapes of the bunks and figures becoming less distinct. You close your eyes once more. This time sleep begins to approach, not suddenly but gradually. Your thoughts slow, the details of the day blur at the edges. The sounds that once seemed so noticeable now feel distant, as if they belong to another place. You drift, and just as you begin to settle fully into rest, a final thought lingers. Tomorrow this space will feel slightly less unfamiliar. The sounds will make more sense. The routines will begin to take shape. You will learn where to step, when to move, how to exist within this shared rhythm. For now, though, you remain here suspended between wakefulness and sleep, listening to the quiet life of the barracks continue around you, and slowly, without effort, you let yourself become part of it. You do not notice the moment at night ends. It happens quietly, almost without permission, as if the darkness simply loosens its hold rather than leaving all at once. Your eyes open before you fully understand why. For a few seconds you lie still listening, unsure what has changed. Then it comes, a bugle call clear and sharp, cutting through the soft morning air. It feels close even if it is not right beside you. The sound carries easily through the wooden walls, reaching every corner of the barracks with a kind of calm authority. Not loud enough to startle, but impossible to ignore. You inhale slowly. Around you others begin to stir, blankets shift. Boots scrape lightly against the floor. Someone exhales with a tired kind of acceptance, as if this moment has arrived too soon, yet exactly when expected. A well-established fact about army life in the 1860s is that bugle calls structured the entire day. They marked waking meals, drills, and rest, creating a predictable rhythm in a place where so much else felt uncertain. You feel that structure now even before you fully understand it. You sit up. The air is cooler than you remember from the night. It touches your skin gently, reminding you that warmth here is never constant. You rub your hands together once more from habit than need, then reach for your boots. The movements around you are steady and efficient. No one rushes, but no one lingers either. There is a quiet understanding of what must be done and when. You pull your boots on. The leather feels stiff at first, still carrying traces of yesterday's dust. As you tighten them, you notice how each small action takes on a certain importance. There is no excess here. No unnecessary motion. You stand. The room looks different in the early light. Softer somehow. The rough edges of the wood are clearer now, the shapes more defined. What felt crowded at night now feels ordered, almost calm. You follow the others outside. The sky is pale. The sun just beginning to rise over the open land beyond the fort walls. A thin layer of light stretches across the yard, touching the buildings one by one. The air carries a faint chill balanced by the promise of warmth later in the day. Men gather in loose lines. You find a place among them, your position guided more by instinct than instruction. The ground beneath your feet is firm, packed down by countless mornings like this one. A voice calls out, short commands, direct and practiced. The kind that do not need explanation. The group responds almost immediately, shifting into formation with a quiet efficiency that feels both disciplined and natural. You adjust your stance, matching those around you. A lesser-known aspect of life in these forts is how much time was spent simply standing, waiting and being counted. Roll calls ensured that everyone was present, accounted for and ready. It was a simple process, but one that reinforced order in a place where disorder could have serious consequences. Names are called. Each man answers in turn, his voice clear but not loud. When it is your turn, you respond the same way, the sound of your own voice blending into the pattern. The process takes time. Not long, but long enough for your mind to wander slightly. You notice the way the light changes as the sun rises higher. The way shadows shift across the yard. The way the wind moves across your face, steady and familiar. When it ends, the formation breaks. The movement that follows is subtle but immediate. Lines dissolve into smaller groups. Some head toward the stables, others toward storage buildings or work areas. A few make their way toward a place where the smell of food is already beginning to form. You follow that scent. It draws you forward with a quiet certainty. The mess area is simple. A space set aside for eating with long tables and benches arranged in rows. A few men are already seated, their postures relaxed in a way that suggests this moment at least is one of brief ease. You take a place. A metal cup is handed to you filled with something dark and steaming. Coffee, though it looks stronger than what you might expect. You lift it carefully, feeling the heat against your hands. The first sip is sharp, bitter, strong but warming. It settles quickly, spreading through your chest in a way that feels grounding. Around you, others drink the same, their expressions calm, as if this taste is no longer something to think about. Food follows. Hard bread, thick and dry but solid. Salted meat, its surface firm, its flavour intense. Nothing here is delicate. Nothing is meant to be. A widely accepted reality of frontier rations is that they were designed for durability, not variety. Flour, salt, pork, beans and coffee formed the backbone of most meals. Fresh food was rare and often unpredictable. You chew slowly. The texture of the bread takes effort. The meat, though flavourful, carries a heaviness that lingers. You begin to understand that eating here is less about enjoyment and more about function. Fuel for the day ahead. Still, there is something steady about it. The act of sitting, eating, sharing space without needing conversation. It creates a quiet sense of routine, one that anchors the morning in something familiar. A man across from you breaks his bread into smaller pieces before eating, as if stretching it further. Another dips his portion into his coffee, briefly softening it. These small adaptations catch your attention. They are practical, learned over time. You try the same. The bread softens slightly, becoming easier to manage. A small improvement, but noticeable. Nearby, a conversation begins, low voices discussing something from the previous day. You do not catch all the words, but you sense the tone. casual yet careful, as if even simple talk carries a certain weight here. Some scholars still debate whether soldiers in these remote forts developed stronger bonds due to shared hardship or whether the monotony and isolation created distance between them. Sitting here now, you can imagine both being true at once. You finish your meal, not because you are full, but because there is no reason to continue. Others begin to stand returning their cups, moving on to whatever comes next. You follow. The morning has fully arrived now. The sun sits higher, casting clearer light across the yard. The chill has softened, replaced by a gentle warmth that will likely grow stronger as the day continues. You pause for a moment, just long enough to take in the scene around you. The buildings, the people, the movement beginning to take shape again. Everything feels slightly more familiar than it did yesterday. Not comfortable yet, but understandable. And as you step forward, joining the flow of activity that defines this place, you realize that this rhythm, this structure is not something you resist. It is something you begin slowly to accept. You move away from the mess area with the taste of coffee still lingering, its bitterness softened now into something steady and familiar. The morning has fully settled over the fort, and with it comes a clearer sense of what the day expects from you. The ground is already warming beneath your boots. You notice it as you walk the packed earth, holding on to the early sun. Dust lifts lightly with each step, not enough to cloud your vision, but enough to remind you that this place is always dry, always shifting in small, quiet ways. A voice calls out nearby. You turn, following the direction of a small group heading toward a row of barrels set along one side of the yard. The barrels are large, bound with metal hoops, their surfaces worn and darkened by constant use. Water. You approach with the others. It seems simple at first. Fill a bucket, carry it, use it carefully. But as you watch the process unfold, you begin to understand that even something as basic as water is handled with attention here. A well-documented reality of frontier life is that water supply often dictated everything else. Many forts were placed near rivers or streams, but that did not mean easy access. Water still had to be hauled, stored and rationed carefully, especially during dry periods. You take hold of a wooden bucket. It feels heavier than you expect even before it is filled. The handle presses into your palm as you lower it into the barrel. The water inside is cool, the surface rippling slightly as you disturb it. You lift. The weight increases instantly. Your arm adjusts your grip, tightening as you steady the bucket. Around you, others do the same, their movements practiced, efficient. No one spills. You carry it a short distance, placing it beside a smaller basin. Another man dips a cloth into the water, wringing it out slowly before wiping his face. The gesture is careful, deliberate, as if each drop matters. You follow his example. The cloth is rough, but the water is refreshing. It cuts through the lingering heaviness of sleep, bringing a quiet clarity to your senses. You wipe your face, your neck, your hands. Each motion feels purposeful. There is no excess here. A lesser-known detail is that full bathing was rare in many frontier forts. Instead, soldiers relied on partial washing when possible, conserving water for drinking and cooking. Cleanliness was important, but it was balanced against necessity. You glance at the bucket again. Already the level has dropped slightly. It's enough to make you aware of how quickly resources can disappear if used without thought. Nearby, a man pours a small amount of water over his hands, rubbing them together, before drying them on a cloth draped over his shoulder. Another carefully cleans a metal cup, ensuring no residue remains. These actions are quiet, almost routine, yet they carry a certain weight. They are habits built from experience. You step back, allowing others to take your place. The air shifts slightly as the sun rises higher. The coolness fades, replaced by a gentle warmth that settles across your skin. It is not uncomfortable yet, but you sense that it will grow stronger as the day continues. Dust clings to everything, your boots, your clothing, even your skin. It is fine, almost powdery, and it moves with the slightest breeze. You brush at your sleeve, watching as it lifts and settles again, never fully leaving. Some accounts from the time describe how dust became a constant companion in these environments, working its way into every space, every object. Whether it was more of an annoyance or a defining feature of daily life is something that continues to be discussed among researchers. You can see both sides of that now. It is not overwhelming, but it is always present. You walk toward another part of the yard where a line has formed near a small structure. The smell here is different, sharper, less pleasant. You hesitate for a moment before realizing what it is. The latrine. It is set slightly apart, positioned to keep its impact contained as much as possible. Even so, the scent reaches you carried lightly by the air. It is not overpowering, but it is enough to make you aware of it. You wait your turn. There is no conversation here, just quiet patience, the kind that comes from understanding that some things cannot be rushed, but also do not need to be discussed. A practical observation often noted in historical records is that sanitation in frontier forts was a constant challenge. Latrines had to be maintained carefully to prevent illness, yet resources and knowledge were limited. The balance was never perfect. When it is your turn, you step inside. The space is simple, functional. There is no attempt to make it comfortable, only usable. You finish quickly. Outside again, the air feels cleaner, even if only slightly. You take a breath, letting it settle before moving on. The fort continues to wake around you. More voices now, more movement. The quiet of early morning gives way to a steady hum of activity. Tools are lifted, doors open and close. Somewhere a horse neighs, the sound sharp against the softer background noise. You walk past a row of laundry lines. Clothing hangs in uneven rows, moving gently in the breeze. Shirts, trousers, blankets. Some are patched, others worn thin in places. The fabric catches the light, revealing textures you might not notice otherwise. A small curious detail sometimes mentioned in personal accounts is that laundresses within forts often played a vital role in maintaining hygiene despite limited supplies. Their work was constant and often underappreciated. You watch as one woman lifts a piece of clothing, inspecting it closely before hanging it back. Her movements are careful, precise. There is a rhythm to her work, just like everything else here. You continue on. Your hands feel cleaner now, your face refreshed, but the dust remains. It always does. You begin to accept that this is not something to fight, but something to live with. The sun climbs higher, shadows shorten. The light grows brighter, more direct. You feel it on your shoulders, warming the fabric of your clothing. The day is fully underway now, its pace steady and unchanging. You pause briefly, not to rest, but to take in what you've begun to understand. Water must be carried. Cleanliness must be managed. Even the simplest needs require effort, planning, and awareness. Nothing is automatic, and yet the people around you move as if it almost is, because for them it has become exactly that. A pattern, a rhythm, a way of living that does not demand attention but rewards it. You step forward again, ready to follow that rhythm a little more closely now. You leave the water barrels behind, with your hands still slightly cool, the faint dampness fading as the morning warmth settles in. The fort is no longer quiet. It hums now with purpose. Not loud, not chaotic, but steady, like a machine that has already found its pace for the day. You follow the movement. It draws you towards a row of buildings set along the inner wall, each one carrying its own distinct sound and smell. You notice the change before you even reach them. The air becomes thicker in places, filled with the traces of smoke, metal, hay, and something faintly sweet that you cannot quite place at first. This is where the fort works. You step closer to the first structure. The rhythmic ringing reaches you clearly now. Metal striking metal in a repeated, measured pattern. Inside, a blacksmith stands over an anvil, his posture grounded, his movements deliberate. Each strike lands with precision, shaping a glowing piece of iron that slowly bends under his control. A commonly recognized truth of frontier forts is that blacksmiths were among the most essential figures within them. They repaired tools, shoed horses, fixed broken equipment, and kept the small details of daily life functioning. Without them, even simple tasks could become difficult. You watch for a moment. The heat inside the workshop is immediate, pressing gently against your skin. The smell of hot metal mixes with coal smoke, creating a scent that feels both harsh and oddly reassuring. It signals activity, capability. The blacksmith does not look up. His focus remains on the iron, his attention fixed on the exact point where force meets resistance. There is something almost calming in the repetition of his work. Strike, adjust, strike again. You move on. Next you pass the steels. The shift in atmosphere is instant. The air here is warmer, thicker, with the scent of hay leather and animals. Horses shift in their stalls, their movements slow but constant. One turns its head as you pass its ears, flicking forward briefly before settling again. A lesser-known aspect of life in these forts is just how dependent they were on horses. They were not only used for travel and patrols, but also for hauling supplies. They were carrying messages and maintaining connections with distant outposts. Their care was a daily responsibility, not an occasional task. You step inside. The ground is layered with straw soft underfoot. A man works nearby, brushing down a horse with steady practice strokes. The animal stands calmly, its breathing slow as if accustomed to this routine. You reach out, resting your hand lightly against the wooden edge of a stall. The texture is worn smooth in places, rough in others. Another sign of constant use. Nothing here remains untouched for long. You move again, following the path between buildings. Voices drift from the next structure mixed with the scrape of wood against wood. You step closer and find yourself at the entrance to a storage area. Barrels, crates, sacks, all stacked with careful intention. Each item placed where it can be found, but also where it will remain safe. A practical reality often noted in records is that supply management was one of the greatest challenges for frontier forts. Deliveries could be delayed for weeks, even months. What arrived had to last. What was lost or damaged might not be replaced quickly. You see evidence of that here. A crate partially open reveals sacks of flour tied tightly at the top. Another holds tools, each one arranged neatly as if their order matters as much as their presence. It likely does. You notice a man marking something in a small book. His movements are precise, his attention focused. Every item counted, every change recorded. It feels methodical, almost careful, to the point of quiet intensity. You step back out into the open air. The sunlight feels stronger now, pressing gently against your shoulders. The sounds of the fort blend together again as you move, creating a steady background that you begin to recognize as normal. You pass by a smaller building. The smell here is different, softer, warmer. Food. Inside, a cook stirs a large pot, the contents thick and slow-moving. The heat is less intense than the blacksmith's workshop, but still noticeable. Steam rises in gentle waves, carrying with it a scent that feels more comforting than anything you've encountered so far today. An interesting detail sometimes mentioned in personal letters is that cooks in these forts often had to be resourceful, working with limited ingredients to create meals that were at least filling, if not always satisfying. Their role, though not always celebrated, was central to maintaining morale. You watch as the cook tastes the mixture briefly, then adds something small from a nearby container. A pinch of something, it disappears into the pot without ceremony. You wonder how much difference it makes. You move on again. Further along, you notice a quieter space. A small building with fewer sounds coming from within. You step closer and pause at the entrance. Inside, the air feels still. Beds are arranged in a neat line, each one separated slightly from the next. A table holds a few instruments, their shapes simple but purposeful. This is the hospital, or as close to one as the fort can offer. A widely accepted understanding is that medical care in these forts was limited. Surgeons did what they could with the knowledge and tools available, but conditions were often basic and outcomes uncertain. You do not stay long. There is a weight to the space that encourages quiet respect. You step back outside, letting the brighter light settle your thoughts again. The fort continues its steady motion. Everywhere you look, there is work being done. Not hurried, not frantic, but constant. Each task connects to another. Each person contributes to the whole, whether they speak much or not. You begin to see how it all fits together. The blacksmith shaping metal so tools can function. The stable hand caring for horses so movement is possible. The storekeeper tracking supplies so nothing is wasted. The cook preparing food so energy is sustained. It is not one system. It is many layered together, each one supporting the others. Some historians have questioned whether this kind of structured life created a sense of stability or simply masked the underlying uncertainty of frontier existence. Walking through it now, you can feel both ideas at once. There is order here, but it rests on something fragile. You pause in the centre of the yard once more. The sun is higher now, the light clearer, the shadows shorter. The fort feels fully awake, its rhythm established, its purpose visible in every small action. You take a breath. The air carries all the scents you have encountered. Smoke, hay, metal, food, dust. They blend together into something that is no longer unfamiliar. It is simply the smell of this place. And as you stand there watching the quiet efficiency of the work around you, you begin to understand that survival here is not built on any single effort. It's built on all of them repeated day after day until they become something steady, something dependable, something you are slowly becoming part of. You drift with the flow of activity, your steps no longer hesitant though still observant. The fort feels more alive now than it did at dawn, not louder in a dramatic way, but fuller. Voices overlap gently, doors open and close. Somewhere a hammer continues its steady rhythm, grounding everything in repetition. As you move past the working areas, you begin to notice something else. Not just soldiers, people who do not wear uniforms. A woman crosses the yard carrying a bundle of folded cloth, her pace measured but confident. She moves as if she belongs here, and clearly she does. A child trails behind her smaller steps, trying to match her stride, pausing now and then to look at something in the dirt. You slow slightly, watching. It shifts your understanding of this place. A widely recognized aspect of many frontier forts is that they were not exclusively military spaces. Civilian workers, traders, and families often lived within or near the walls, forming a small, layered community that extended beyond strict military life. You follow at a distance, not wanting to interrupt. The woman stops near a building you recognize from earlier, the laundry lines. She begins to sort through the hanging clothes, her hands moving quickly, almost without thought. The child settles nearby, sitting cross-legged, tracing shapes in the dust with a small stick. There is a quiet comfort in the scene. Routine, but softer than the routines you have seen so far. You continue on. Near the far side of the yard, a group has gathered around a wagon that has recently arrived. The wood creaks slightly as it settles its wheels, coated in the same pale dust that covers everything else. A man stands beside it, speaking with two soldiers, his hat tilted back, his expression animated. A trader, perhaps. A lesser-known detail of frontier forts is how important these travelling merchants were. They brought goods that could not be produced within the fort. Cloth small luxuries, sometimes even fresh items when luck allowed. Their visits broke the monotony and connected the fort to a wider world. You step closer, listening. The conversation is casual but attentive. Prices are mentioned, quantities discussed. There is a careful balance here, a negotiation that feels both routine and significant. You catch a glimpse inside the wagon. Crates stacked tightly, a few barrels, something wrapped in cloth. It is hard to see clearly, but the presence of these items alone seems to draw interest from those nearby. You notice how people linger just a little longer than necessary. Curiosity, perhaps, or hope. You move away again, giving them space. As you walk, you pass a smaller group seated in the shade of one of the buildings. Their posture is different, less rigid, more relaxed. One of them wears a uniform, but not quite like the others. His clothing carries small differences, subtle details that set him apart. Beside him sits another man dressed differently again. His clothing is practical, worn, suited to the land beyond the fort rather than the life within it. They speak quietly. You cannot hear the words, but the tone suggests familiarity. Respect, perhaps, or something close to it. An interesting observation sometimes raised in historical discussions is how these forts served as points of contact between very different groups. Soldiers, civilians, and individuals from surrounding regions all intersected here, creating relationships that were not always simple or easily defined. You continue on, letting that thought settle. Near one of the buildings, you hear laughter again. Clearer this time. You turn to see a small group gathered around what looks like a makeshift table. Cards are spread across its surface, hands moving slowly as each player considers their next move. Coins rest near the edge. Not many, but enough to matter. A man leans back, slightly smiling as he places a card down. Another shakes his head, though there is no real frustration in the gesture. It feels more like a familiar exchange, one repeated many times before. You pause at a distance. The scene is easy to understand. Even here, in a place built on discipline and necessity, people find moments to step outside of routine, to engage in something lighter, something that does not directly serve survival but still feels important. Some historians have explored whether these small social moments helped maintain morale or introduce tensions that could disrupt order. Watching now, you sense both possibilities. The laughter is real, but so is the quiet awareness of what is at stake even in a simple game. You move on. The child you saw earlier has wandered slightly now closer to the centre of the yard. He watches everything with a kind of quiet curiosity, his gaze following movements that others no longer notice. For him, this is normal. That thought lingers with you. To grow up in a place like this, to see soldiers, wagons, tools and routines not as unusual but as everyday life. It reshapes your understanding of what this fort represents. It is not only a place of G, it is a place of living. You pass by a doorway where voices rise and fall in steady conversation. Inside, a few women sit together mending clothing. Their hands move quickly, thread passing through fabric with practiced ease. The work is constant, but there is a softness to it, a rhythm that feels different from the tasks outside. They speak as they work, not loudly, but enough to fill the space with quiet connection. A small, often overlooked detail is how these domestic tasks formed an essential part of fort life. Clothing had to be repaired, cleaned, maintained. Without it, the daily routines would falter quickly. You continue walking. The sun is higher now, its warmth more noticeable. Shadows have drawn closer to the buildings, leaving the open areas bright and exposed. You feel it on your face, your arms, a steady reminder that the day is still unfolding. You stop near the centre again. The fort moves around you, each person following their own path, yet somehow staying connected to the whole. Soldiers, workers, families, traders, each one part of something larger, even if they do not always interact directly. You begin to understand the layers. It is not just a military post. It is a small, shifting community shaped by necessity, sustained by routine, and defined by the people who live within it. Some scholars continue to discuss whether these forts felt more like temporary stations or lasting settlements to those who lived there. Standing here now, you can imagine how the answer might change depending on the day. For some, it is a stop along a longer path. For others, it is the place where life happens day after day in ways both ordinary and quietly meaningful. You take a breath. The air carries voices, movement, the faint scent of food and dust and sun-warmed wood. It feels familiar now, not because it has changed, but because you have. You're no longer just observing. You are beginning to belong. You feel the shift toward evening before you see it. The light softens again, losing the sharp edge it carried through the middle of the day. Shadows stretch longer across the yard, reaching toward one another until they begin to merge. The activity of the fort slows, not stopping, but easing into a different pace. You notice it in the way people move. Less urgency, more intention. A bugle call rises once more, its tone different from the morning signal. Lower, more measured. It carries across the fort and out into the open land beyond, marking a change that everyone seems to understand without needing explanation. You follow the others toward the edge of the yard. A small group gathers near the gate. Some carry rifles. Others adjust belts or check small details on their uniforms. Their movements are quiet, focused. There is no conversation beyond what is necessary. You realize what is happening. Guard duty. A commonly noted feature of frontier forts is the importance of constant watch. Even when no immediate threat was visible, guards were posted day and night. The surrounding land could appear calm, but that calm was never fully trusted. You're handed a rifle. It feels heavier than you expect. The wood is smooth in places worn by use, while the metal parts carry a faint coolness that contrasts with the warmth of the evening air. You hold it, carefully adjusting your grip until it feels steady. A man nearby shows you briefly where to stand. His instructions are simple, clear. You nod even though you already understand that much of this will be learned through doing rather than listening. You take your place. The gate stands behind you now, its solid form reassuring in a practical way. Beyond it, the land stretches out in all directions, open, quiet, uncertain. The sky deepens in colour as the sun lowers further. You fix your gaze outward. At first, it feels like nothing is happening. The land lies still. Grass moves slightly in the breeze. A distant shape might be a rock or something else entirely. It is hard to tell at this distance. You listen. That is where the change begins. Without the constant movement of the day, smaller sounds become clearer. The wind passing through dry grass, the faint rustle of something shifting far off, the occasional call of a bird settling for the night. Each sound feels sharper. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in personal accounts is how quickly soldiers learn to read the environment through sound alone. A change in rhythm, an unfamiliar noise, even a sudden silence could signal something worth noticing. You begin to understand that now. You shift your weight slightly, careful not to move too much. The ground beneath your boots feels different in the evening. Cooler, firmer. The dust has settled, no longer rising with every step. The air carries a hint of moisture, subtle but noticeable. Time stretches. It does not move slowly exactly, but it feels longer. Each moment holds more detail, more awareness. You find yourself focusing on small things. The way your hands rest on the rifle, the steady rhythm of your breathing, the slight tension in your shoulders that you gradually release. Some researchers have suggested that guard duty could feel more mentally demanding than physically exhausting. The stillness required, combined with the need for constant awareness, created a unique kind of fatigue. Standing here, you can see how that might be true. You remain alert, not tense but present. The light fades further. The sky shifts from orange to deeper shades of blue, then toward the darker tones of night. Stars begin to appear again one by one, just as they did the night before. Without the distractions of movement, they seem even more noticeable now. A figure moves along the wall to your left, another guard checking positions. His steps are measured, his presence steady. He nods briefly as he passes a small acknowledgement that feels meaningful in the quiet. You return the gesture. There is a sense of shared responsibility here, unspoken but understood. The fort behind you has grown quieter. You can still hear occasional movement. A door closing, a voice speaking softly. But these sounds feel distant now, separated from your current task. Your world has narrowed. Just you, the wall, the gate, and the open land beyond. A distant sound reaches you. You pause, focusing. It is faint, almost easy to dismiss, but it is different from the wind, more irregular. You hold still, listening more carefully. After a moment it fades. Perhaps an animal, perhaps something else. You cannot be certain. Moments like this linger. They sharpen your awareness, reminding you that even in stillness there is always the possibility of change. Some historians continued to examine how often perceived threats during guard duty turned out to be nothing at all. The mind, given enough time and quiet, can fill gaps with its own interpretations. You breathe out slowly, letting the tension ease just slightly. The night settles fully now. The temperature drops a little more, enough that you notice it against your skin. You adjust your stance, grounding yourself again. Time passes. You do not measure it in minutes, but in shifts of light, in patterns of sound. The sky deepens, the stars multiply. The land beyond remains quiet, holding its distance. At some point another figure approaches, your relief. The exchange is brief. A few words, quiet and direct. You hand over the responsibility without ceremony, stepping back from your position. The rifle feels lighter now as you return it. Or perhaps you have simply adjusted to its weight. You walk back into the fort. The difference is immediate. The sense of enclosure, the softer sounds, the faint warmth that lingers in the air from fires and bodies. You take a breath. The tension you held outside begins to fade, not completely, but enough. You realize then that standing watch is not only about looking outward, it is about holding a space, maintaining a boundary, being present in a way that allows others to rest. And as you move back toward the barracks, the quiet rhythm of the fort guiding your steps once more, you carry that understanding with you. A small piece of what it means to live here. You step back into the softer enclosure of the fort, your eyes adjusting again to the lantern glow and the muted outlines of buildings. The tension from the watch lingers in your shoulders for a moment, then slowly eases as familiar sounds return. A quiet conversation here. The low crackle of a fire there. The steady, contained life of the fort wrapping around you again. But something draws your attention. a different smell. Not the usual mix of smoke and leather, but something richer, earthier. It pulls you gently toward the far side of the yard, where the buildings thin out and a patch of open ground stretches between them. You walk toward it. At first, it does not look like much. Just a small section of land, uneven, marked by rows that are not perfectly straight. But as you step closer, you begin to notice the details. Plants growing low to the ground. Leaves spread wide, catching the last of the evening light. A garden. A practical truth often mentioned in records is that many frontier forts attempted to grow their own food when possible. It was not always successful given the soil and weather, but even small harvests could make a difference in daily life. You kneel slightly, looking closer. The soil is dry at the surface, but darker beneath where moisture has been preserved. Someone has worked this ground carefully, turning it, tending it, giving attention to something that cannot be rushed. You reach out, but stop just short of touching. It feels like a space that requires respect. Nearby, a man stands with a small tool in his hand, loosening the earth around one of the plants. His movements are slow, patient. He glances at you briefly, then returns to his work without comment. You understand, this is not a place for interruption. You stand again and move on. Beyond the garden, the fort opens slightly toward a less structured area. The ground here is more uneven, marked by tracks that lead outward and then disappear into the surrounding land. You follow one of these paths for a short distance. The air changes, fresher in a way, less contained. The scent of grass and open space replaces the layered smells of the fort. It reminds you how close the outside world always is, even when you are within the walls. You notice a small group gathered near a fire. They are not in uniform. Their clothing is practical, suited to movement across the land. One of them holds a piece of meat over the flames, turning it slowly. The smell reaches you rich and immediate. Hunting. A lesser discussed detail is how soldiers and civilians sometimes supplemented their rations by hunting nearby. It was not always reliable, and it required time and skill, but when successful it added variety to otherwise repetitive meals. You approach carefully. One of the men looks up, nodding slightly in acknowledgement. There is no need for words. The fire crackles between you, its warmth spreading outward in gentle waves. The meat sizzles lightly. You watch as it changes colour, the surface darkening, releasing small bursts of scent that make your mouth water almost without thinking. It is different from the food you had earlier. Fresher, less preserved. The man offers you a small piece. You accept. The taste is immediate. Rich, slightly smoky, with a softness that contrasts sharply with the hardness of the bread from the morning. It feels like something rare, even if it is simple. You nod in thanks. He returns the gesture, then focuses again on the fire. You step back after a moment, letting them continue. As you walk, you pass near a stack of barrels set slightly apart from the main storage area. The lids are secured tightly, but one sits just slightly askew. You pause, curiosity pulling at you. You lift it just enough to peer inside. The smell is sharp. Spoiled. You close it quickly. A small, often overlooked reality is that not all supplies survive the journey to these remote forts. Food could spoil, barrels could leak, pests could find their way in. Loss was part of the system and it had to be accounted for. You step away, the scent lingering briefly before fading. It adds another layer to your understanding. Even what arrives is not guaranteed to remain usable. You return toward the centre of the fort. The light has dimmed further now, the sky deepening into night once again. Lanterns glow more brightly in contrast, marking paths between buildings, guiding movement without fully illuminating it. You pass the mess area. It is quieter now, but not empty. A few figures remain seated with cups in hand, speaking in low tones. The earlier activity has faded, replaced by something more reflective. You pause near the entrance. A conversation drifts toward you. Words about supplies, about the last delivery, about what might come next. There is no urgency in their voices, but there is awareness. A constant calculation of what is available and what is not. Some researchers continue to explore how food scarcity influenced morale in isolated forts. Whether the monotony of rations weighed more heavily than the actual lack of quantity is still a topic of discussion. You can imagine how both might matter. You move on. Near one of the buildings, you see a man carefully cleaning a small piece of equipment. His hands move with precision, wiping away dust, checking each part. It is a quiet task, but one that carries importance. Everything here must be maintained. Nothing can be taken for granted. You step back into the open space of the yard. The night feels settled now. Not empty, but complete. The sounds have softened again, blending into that steady hum you're beginning to recognize. You take a breath. The air carries the faint traces of everything you have encountered. Earth from the garden, smoke from the fire, the distant hint of cooked meat. Even the memory of spoiled supplies now barely noticeable. It all exists together. You stand for a moment longer, thinking about how food here is not just something you eat. It is something you grow, hunt, trade, preserve, and sometimes lose. Each piece carries effort, uncertainty, and value. It's never taken lightly. And as you turn to head back toward the barracks, the rhythm of the fort guiding you, once again you carry that understanding with you. Another layer added, another small truth about what it means to live here. You return toward the barracks with the quiet of night settling more deeply around you, the last conversations fading into softer tones. The lantern light feels dimmer now, or perhaps your eyes have simply grown used to the dark. Either way, the fort seems to draw inward at this hour as if conserving its energy. But even in this stillness, something feels different. You notice it first in the air, a faint heaviness. Not from smoke or dust this time, but something less tangible. A quiet discomfort that lingers just beneath the surface of everything. You step inside the barracks. The room is dim, the lantern at the far end casting only a small circle of light. Most of the bunks are already occupied. Figures lie still beneath blankets, their breathing slow and steady. But not all of them. One man shifts restlessly, turning from one side to the other. Another sits upright, his back against the wall, his head lowered slightly. A soft cough breaks the silence, followed by another, then quiet again. A commonly recorded reality of life in frontier forts is that illness was often more dangerous than any external threat. Close quarters, limited sanitation, and inconsistent medical knowledge created conditions where disease could spread easily. You move carefully to your bunk. The wood creaks slightly as you sit, the familiar sound grounding you. You glance around again, more aware now of the subtle signs, the uneven breathing, the occasional movement that does not quite settle. You lie back slowly. The mattress shifts beneath you, the straw inside adjusting as it did the night before. But your awareness is sharper now. You notice more. The man a few bunks away coughs again. It's not loud, but it carries. A dry, persistent sound that lingers just a moment too long. You turn your head slightly listening. No one reacts. Not because they do not notice, but because it's not unusual. A lesser-known detail is how common minor illnesses were in these environments. Colds, fevers, stomach issues. Small things that in other circumstances might pass quickly, but here could linger or worsen. You pull your blanket up. The air feels cooler tonight, or perhaps your body is simply more aware of it. You adjust your position, trying to find the same sense of ease you had begun to discover the night before. It takes longer this time. Your mind moves through what you have seen. The water, the food, the shared spaces. Each one carries its own risks as well as its purpose. You hear a quiet murmur. Someone speaking softly, though the words are not clear. Another voice responds lower, calmer. The tones suggest reassurance, or at least the attempt of it. You close your eyes, but sleep does not come immediately. Instead, your thoughts settle on the small hospital you passed earlier. The stillness inside, the careful arrangement of beds, the limited tools. You imagine how those spaces are used when someone here becomes more than just slightly unwell. A practical understanding often discussed in historical studies is that medical care in these forts depended heavily on the skill and experience of a single surgeon or assistant. Supplies were limited, and treatments were not always effective by modern standards. You breathe slowly, letting the thought pass without holding onto it too tightly. Nearby, the restless movement continues. The man who'd been turning now sits up briefly, then lies back down again. His breathing is uneven, not quite settling into the steady rhythm of sleep. Some scholars continue to explore how soldiers perceived illness in these environments. Whether it was seen as an unavoidable part of life or something that carried a deeper sense of fear is not always clear. You can feel both possibilities. There is acceptance, but also a quiet awareness that things can change quickly. You shift onto your side. The wood presses lightly against your shoulder again, a familiar sensation now. You focus on it, using it as an anchor, something simple and physical. The sounds begin to blur slightly, not disappearing but softening. The cough becomes part of the background. The murmured voices fade into indistinct tones. The movements settle into occasional interruption rather than constant ones. Your breathing slows, in then out. Deck! Time passes. You do not track it directly, but you feel it in the way your body relaxes, in the way your thoughts become less sharp, less defined. At some point, the man who'd been coughing grows quieter, not completely silent but less frequent. The space between each sound lengthens, allowing the room to return to something closer to rest. You notice that, and something in you eases slightly. A small, curious observation sometimes noted in personal writings is how quickly people adapted to these conditions. What might feel alarming at first became part of the expected rhythm, absorbed into daily life without constant concern. You are beginning to understand that. Not through explanation, but through experience. Your body adjusts. Your mind follows. The barracks, with all its shared space and subtle discomforts, becomes less of a challenge and more of a backdrop, a place where life continues even when it is not perfect. You drift closer to sleep. The lantern light dims further, its glow shrinking, until it is barely noticeable. The room darkens, shapes blending together, edges softening. You let your eyes remain closed. The last sounds you notice are quiet ones, a slow breath, a distant shift, the faint movement of air through the structure. They no longer feel intrusive. They feel expected. And as you settle into that understanding, allowing it to carry you gently away from the awareness of the room, you begin to rest. Not completely free of thought, but close enough. You wake to a quieter morning. Not silent, but softer than before, as if the fort itself is taking a slower breath. The bugle still sounds, though it feels less sharp today, or perhaps your ears have simply grown used to it. The rhythm of rising, dressing, and stepping outside begins again, but something in your awareness has shifted. You are no longer surprised by it. The air carries a gentle coolness as you move into the yard, your steps more certain now. The ground feels familiar beneath your boots. The buildings no longer seem like rough shapes to be studied, but places you already understand in a quiet, practical way. And yet something feels different. There is a sense of waiting. You notice it in the way people glance toward the gate more often than usual, in the slight pauses between tasks, in the way conversations seem to circle around a shared expectation. You follow their gaze. The gate stands as it always does, solid and unchanged. But beyond it, somewhere out on the long stretch of land, something is approaching. Mail. A well-established pattern in frontier life is that letters and news did not arrive regularly. Instead, they came in waves carried by wagons or riders who travelled great distances. Weeks could pass with no word from the outside world, making each arrival significant. You feel that significance now, even before anything appears. You move closer to the centre of the yard, joining the loose gathering that begins to form. No one stands in strict formations, but there is a shared focus, a quiet pull toward the same point. Time stretches again, not like during guard duty, but in a different way, more anticipatory, more alert. A small distant shape appears on the horizon. At first, it is hard to distinguish, just a movement against the pale line where land meets sky. But slowly it grows clearer. The outline of a wagon, the steady pace of horses pulling it forward. You feel a subtle shift ripple through the group. Not excitement exactly, but something close to it. A quiet lift in attention. A lesser-known aspect of these mail arrivals is how much they influence morale. Letters carried not just information, but connection. They bridge the distance between the fort and the lives left behind. The wagon draws nearer. Dust rises behind it, trailing in a thin line that catches the morning light. The driver sits upright, guiding the horses with practiced ease. Beside him, another figure scans the surroundings, alert but calm. The gate opens. The sound of wood moving against wood echoes briefly, then settles. The wagon rolls inside its wheels, creaking as they cross the packed earth of the yard. You step back slightly, giving space. Leaving space. People gather, but not too close. There is an unspoken order to this process. Names will be called, items distributed, everything done with care even if the anticipation is strong. A man steps forward with a list. He begins to read. Each name is spoken clearly, followed by a pause. Those called step forward, receiving small bundles, folded papers, sometimes nothing at all. You watch. The reactions are subtle but noticeable. A slight smile, a quiet nod. A moment of stillness as someone holds a letter before opening it. You feel the weight of that moment, the connection it represents. You hear your name. It catches you off guard, even though you have been listening for it. You step forward, your movement steady, your attention focused. A letter is placed in your hand. It is lighter than you expect. The paper feels thin, slightly rough at the edges. It carries no scent, no immediate indication of what it contains. Just the shape of words waiting to be read. You step aside. For a moment, you simply hold it. Around you, others begin to read theirs. Some immediately unfolding the paper with careful hands. Others wait, tucking it away as if saving the moment for later. You unfold yours. The sound of the paper is soft, almost delicate. The writing inside is familiar, though you have not seen it in some time. The lines carry more than information. They carry presence. A voice, in a way. You read slowly. Each word settles differently. Some bring a sense of comfort. Others remind you of distance, of everything that exists beyond this place continuing without you. A commonly discussed point in historical reflections is how letters served as emotional anchors for those stationed in remote locations. They offered reassurance but also reinforced the separation between two worlds. If you feel that balance now, connection and distance at the same time, you fold the letter again, carefully. It feels important to keep it intact, to preserve it in the state you received it. You place it inside your clothing, close enough to remain with you but secure. Nearby, a man laughs softly, shaking his head as he reads. Another sits quietly, his expression unreadable, his focus fixed on the page in his hands. Not everyone receives something. You notice that too. A few step back, empty-handed, their movements unchanged, their expressions steady. But there is a subtle difference. A quiet absence that lingers for a moment before being absorbed into the routine. Some historians continue to examine how the individuals coped with long periods without communication. Whether silence became easier over time or more difficult is not easily answered. You can imagine both. The wagon is unloaded gradually. Small parcels, supplies, newspapers, their pages already worn at the edges. People glance at them briefly, scanning headlines, sharing bits of information in low voices. News travels quickly once it arrives. But it also fades, quickly absorbed into the ongoing rhythm of the fort. You move away from the gathering. The yard returns to its usual flow, though with a slight shift in energy. Conversations carry new details. Movements feel just a bit lighter, or in some cases more inward. You find a place to stand, just for a moment. You take a breath, letting the air settle in your chest. The letter rests against you, a quiet presence. Not changing your surroundings, but adding something to them. You realize then that waiting is part of life here. Waiting for supplies, for news, for change. And when something finally arrives, it does not transform everything. It simply adds another layer, another thread woven into the steady, unbroken pattern of days. You lift your gaze. The fort continues as it always does. Work resumes. Voices rise and fall. The sun climbs higher, carrying the day forward without pause. But now there is something else within it, a connection that stretches beyond the walls, and you carry it with you as you step back into the rhythm once more. You keep moving through the yard, the letter still resting close against you, its presence quiet but steady. The morning has shifted into something fuller now, the earlier anticipation dissolving into routine once more. Yet a subtle awareness remains, like an echo that does not quite fade. As you walk, your attention begins to drift outward, not just within the fort, but beyond it. The walls that once felt like protection now feel like a boundary, a line between two worlds that exist side by side yet do not fully blend. You find yourself near the edge again. The gate stands open for a short time after the wagon's arrival, and through it you can see the wide stretch of land beyond. The same open plains, the same shifting grass, the same distant horizon that seems to move the farther you look. But now you notice something else. Movement. Not close, not immediate, but present. A small group in the distance. Figures on horseback, their outlines softened by the distance and light. They do not approach directly. Instead, they move along a line that runs parallel to the fort, their path steady, deliberate. You stand still watching. No one rushes towards the gate, no alarm is raised. But you sense the awareness ripple through those nearby. Heads turn, conversations pause briefly, then continue in quieter tones. A widely acknowledged reality of frontier life is that forts were often situated near lands inhabited by indigenous nations. These spaces were not empty, despite how they might appear at a glance. They were part of larger networks of movement, territory, and meaning. You continue to watch. The riders remain at a distance. Their presence is neither hidden nor fully revealed. They exist in that space just beyond reach where details are difficult to confirm, but awareness remains strong. A man steps beside you. He does not speak at first, he simply looks in the same direction, his posture relaxed, but attentive. You glance at him briefly. He nods once as small acknowledgement that you both see the same thing. Then he speaks quietly, not to explain but to state something simple, that this is not unusual, that movement like this happens often, that not every encounter leads to interaction. You listen. It settles your thoughts but does not remove the sense of distance. A lesser known detail is how many interactions between forts and nearby indigenous groups were based on observation rather than direct contact. Watching learning patterns, understanding presence without always crossing into engagement. You look again. The riders have shifted slightly, their path continuing along the horizon. They do not approach the fort, but they do not disappear either. They remain visible, a reminder of something larger than this enclosed space. You feel that clearly now. The fort is not isolated in the way it might first appear. It exists within a wider landscape that holds its own rhythms, its own structures, its own histories. You turn away slowly. The gate closes behind you, the sound of wood meeting wood marking the return to the contained world inside. The movement beyond fades from view, though not from your thoughts. You walk back into the yard. The activity continues. Work, conversation, the steady flow of tasks that define the day. But something has shifted in your understanding. You pass a small group gathered near the shade of a building. Their voices are low but focused. You catch fragments of their conversation. Words about trade, about past meetings, about moments when interaction did occur, when goods were exchanged, when communication was attempted across differences in language and expectation. An interesting point sometimes raised in historical discussions is how these encounters varied widely. Some were peaceful, others tense. Many fell somewhere in between, shaped by circumstance and perception, rather than clear intention. You move on, letting the fragments settle without trying to complete them. Near the stables you notice a man preparing a horse. His movements are careful, checking each strap, adjusting each piece of equipment with quiet precision. The animal stands still, its breathing slow, its presence calm. You watch for a moment, then you realize this preparation is not for routine work within the fort, it is for movement beyond it. You feel a subtle shift again. The idea of leaving the walls even briefly carries a different weight now. A practical understanding often explored by historians is that patrols and expeditions beyond the fort required careful planning and awareness. The land was known in some ways but never fully predictable. You step back. The man finishes his preparations, then leads the horse toward the gate. Another follows, similarly equipped. Their expressions are steady, not tense but focused. The gate opens again. They pass through without hesitation. You watch until they are no longer visible. The moment lingers, a quiet reminder that the boundary you stand within is not fixed. It is crossed regularly by those who must move between these two spaces. You return your attention to the yard. The fort feels both smaller and larger now. Smaller because you understand its limits. Larger because you see how it connects to everything beyond. Some researchers continue to examine how individuals perceive these surrounding communities. Whether they were seen primarily through fear, curiosity, or something more complex is not always clear. Standing here, you sense that complexity. It is not one feeling. It is many layered together. You take a breath. The air carries the familiar scents again. Dustwood, the faint trace of food. The sounds settle into their steady pattern. The routines continue. But now you carry something else with you. An awareness of what exists beyond the walls, not as a distant idea, but as a presence that moves, watches, and continues just as you do. And as you step back into the rhythm of the fort, your understanding deepens once more. Another layer added, another quiet truth revealed. You drift away from the gate, though the image of the distant riders lingers in your thoughts like a shape that does not fully fade. The fort resumes its steady pace around you, yet your awareness feels wider now, as if your senses reach a little farther than before. Near the edge of the yard, you notice a small group gathered around a rough table. Maps. At first glance, they look simple. Sheets of paper marked with lines and symbols that do not immediately reveal their meaning. But as you step closer, you begin to see patterns. Rivers traced in thin curves, trails marked with faint, uneven strokes, small notes written in careful script. A man leans over the table, pointing to a section of the map. His clothing is not quite standard. There is something different in the way he carries himself, a familiarity with the land that feels deeper than what you have seen in most soldiers. Beside him stands another figure, listening closely, his expression attentive. A commonly accepted insight about frontier operations is that local knowledge often mattered more than formal training. Trails, water sources, seasonal changes, and safe passages were not always recorded in official documents. They were learned through experience often shared by those who knew the land intimately. You watch as the man traces a line with his finger. He speaks quietly, his words measured. Though you cannot hear everything, you understand the intent. He is explaining something that cannot easily be written down, something that must be understood through memory and observation. An interpreter stands nearby. He listens, then repeats the explanation in a different language, his voice steady, his tone careful. Each phrase is considered before it is passed on, as if accuracy depends not just on words, but on understanding. You realize how delicate this process is, meaning moving between people shaped slightly with each step. A small but telling detail sometimes noted in personal accounts is how interpreters held a unique position within these environments. They bridged gaps that could not be crossed. Otherwise, yet their role required constant balance between different perspectives. You remain quiet, observing. The discussion continues, shifting between pointing, speaking, and pausing. At times the man gestures outward toward the land beyond the walls, as if the map itself is only a small reflection of something much larger. You begin to understand that these lines and marks are not the territory itself. They are an attempt to capture it, and not always a complete one. A thoughtful observation raised in historical research is that maps created during this period often varied in accuracy, especially in regions that were still being explored or contested. Different sources could present different versions of the same landscape. You glance down again. The map in front of you carries signs of that uncertainty. Some areas are clearly marked, others fade into blank space or contain notes that suggest incomplete knowledge. You step back slightly. The conversation continues without you, its rhythm steady, its purpose clear. You move on. Nearby, another group repairs equipment. Saddlebags laid open, items placed inside with careful attention. Water flasks, small tools wrap food. Each piece chosen deliberately, nothing added without reason. You watch as one man checks the contents again. Then again, there is a quiet precision in the repetition. A lesser-known aspect of these preparations is how much depended on memory, knowing what to bring, what might be needed, what could be left behind. There was no room for excess, but also little room for omission. You notice the expressions, focused but not tense. This is familiar to them. A routine, even if it leads beyond the walls. You walk a little farther. A man sits on a low crate cleaning his boots. The action is simple, almost meditative. Cloth against leather, removing the dust that always returns. He glances up briefly as you pass, then resumes his work. It reminds you how every detail here is maintained. Not perfectly, but consistently. You turn toward a quieter area of the fort, a small space near one of the buildings where fewer people pass. There you find another pair speaking in low voices. One gestures towards the horizon, though the walls block the view. The other listens, nodding occasionally. You cannot hear their words, but you sense the tone, discussion not argument, sharing not commanding. A reflective point often explored by scholars is how communication in these settings relied heavily on trust. Information had to be believed even when it could not be immediately verified. You consider that. How much of what happens here depends on what people say, what they remember, what they interpret. You step back into the open yard. The sun sits high now, the light strong, the air warm. The fort moves steadily, its rhythm unchanged, yet your understanding continues to shift. You look once more toward the area where the maps were spread. The group has begun to disperse, the papers are folded, carefully stored away. The knowledge they hold does not disappear, but it returns to memory, to conversation, to experience. You take a breath. The air feels familiar again, filled with the layered sense you have come to expect. The sounds blend into their steady pattern, grounding you in the present moment. You realize then that survival here is not only about strength or endurance. It is about knowing the land, knowing the people, knowing when to move and when to remain still. And much of that knowledge is not written down. It is carried, shared, adapted. You begin to understand your place within that process, not as someone who already knows, but as someone who is learning piece by piece. And as you turn to continue through the fort, the rhythm guiding you forward once more, you carry that awareness with you. Another quiet layer, another step deeper into what it means to live here. You leave the cluster of maps and measured voices behind, carrying with you a sense that knowledge here is as valuable as any tool. The yard opens again, bright under the high sun, and the rhythm of the day shifts towards something more physical. You hear it before you see it, boots striking ground in unison. A sharp command follows, clear and controlled. You turn toward the sound and find a group of soldiers arranged in lines across an open stretch of the yard. Their movements are synchronized, each step placed with care, each turn executed at the same moment. Drill, an established feature of army life during this period, is the constant repetition of marching and formation exercises. It was not simply for display. It ensured that individuals could move together as a unit, responding quickly and predictably under pressure. You step closer, stopping just outside the lines. A sergeant stands at the front, his posture firm, his voice steady, and he calls out instruction. Each one followed by a precise response from the group. Left, right, turn, halt. The pattern repeats, building a rhythm that feels almost like a steady beat. You watch their feet. Dust lifts with each step, rising briefly before settling again. The ground bears the marks of countless drills, faint impressions that overlap and fade only to be replaced by new ones. There is a discipline here that goes beyond the movement itself. It is in the timing, in the shared awareness of when to act. A small, often overlooked detail is how much of a soldier's day could be spent in these repetitive exercises even when there was no immediate threat. The practice itself became part of the structure that held everything together. You notice how some faces remain neutral, focused inward. Others carry a slight tension, a concentration that suggests effort. Not all movements are identical, but they're close enough to function as one. The command changes. The group shifts into a new pattern, turning, stepping, adjusting formation. The transitions are smooth practice, the result of many repetitions. You feel the rhythm settle into your own body. Almost without thinking, your weight shifts slightly with each step you observe, as if your muscles are responding to the pattern even without direct instruction. You step back as another group forms nearby. This one is different. They hold rifles. The movements here are slower, more deliberate. Each action is broken into clear steps. Lift, aim, lower. The metal catches the sunlight, briefly reflecting a small flash before returning to its muted tone. A commonly noted reality is that weapon maintenance and handling were treated with careful attention. A rifle was not just equipment. It was essential, and any failure could carry serious consequences. You watch as a man checks his rifle. He runs a cloth along the barrel, inspecting it closely. Then he adjusts a small mechanism, his fingers moving with practiced familiarity. Each step is repeated with care, as if skipping one could lead to trouble later. You glance at your own hands. Empty for now, but you remember the weight from the night before, the way it grounded you, the way it demanded awareness. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in letters from soldiers is how they personalize their equipment in small ways. marks carved into wood, slight adjustments to fit their grip. These changes were subtle but meaningful. You look again at the rifles. From a distance they appear identical. But up close you can imagine the small differences, the quiet individuality within the uniform structure. The drill continues. Commands rise and fall, the rhythm steady. The repetition does not seem to tire them in the usual way. Instead, it creates a kind of focused, narrowing attention to the task at hand. Some historians continue to examine whether this constant drilling reduced boredom or simply disguised it. The line between discipline and monotony is not always clear. You consider that as you watch. There is a calm here, but also a sense of endless repetition. The same steps, the same commands, day after day. And yet it serves a purpose. You move toward the edge of the training area. The sun is strong now, its warmth pressing against your back. Sweat forms lightly at your neck, a reminder that even standing still carries effort in this heat. A man nearby takes a short break, stepping out of line to adjust his uniform. He wipes his forehead with the back of his hand, then returns without hesitation when called. There is no resistance, only continuation. You notice how the ground here is more worn than elsewhere. The constant movement has smoothed it, removing small stones, pressing the surface into something firm and even. It reflects the work that has been done, the repetition that has shaped it. You take a breath. The air carries dust, warmth, and the faint metallic scent from the rifles. It is a mixture that feels sharp but not unpleasant. It belongs to this place. You begin to understand that not all the parts of life here are about visible action or immediate need. Some are about preparation, about building something that may not be used today or even tomorrow but must be ready when the time comes. You step back from the training ground. The commands continue behind you, their rhythm steady, fading slightly as you move away. The rest of the fort carries on with its own tasks, each one part of the larger pattern. You pause once more, thinking about how much of this life is built on repetition, not just in movement but in thought, in expectation, in the way each day unfolds with familiar steps. It is not exciting, but it is necessary, and as you turn to continue through the fort, the sound of boots striking the ground echoing softly behind you, you carry that understanding with you. Another piece of the rhythm, another quiet truth about how this place endures. You drift away from the training ground, the echo of synchronized steps fading into the wider hum of the fort. The afternoon stretches out warmer, now the sun sitting high and steady. The pace of work continues, but you begin to notice something else emerging beneath it. A subtle loosening, not of discipline, but of tension. Near one of the shaded corners of the yard, a small cluster of men gathers round a rough wooden table. You recognize the setup immediately. Cards laid out in uneven stacks, a few coins resting near the edge, catching the light just enough to draw the eye. You slow your steps. The voices here are different, lighter, less measured. There is a softness to the laughter, a quiet release that contrasts with the structured rhythm you have seen elsewhere. You move closer, but not too close. A familiar pattern in frontier forts was the presence of small games and informal gambling during off-duty hours. These moments offered a break from routine, a chance to engage in something unpredictable even within a highly ordered environment. You watch as one man studies his hand. His expression is calm but focused. He glances briefly at the others, then places a card down with a small deliberate motion. Another responds quickly, almost without hesitation. The game moves at its own pace. Not rushed, but not so slow either. A man leans back slightly, folding his arms as he waits his turn. His posture suggests comfort, but his eyes remain fixed on the table. There is a tension here, even in something meant for relaxation. You notice the coins. They are not many, but they carry weight. Each one represents more than just value. It is a small risk, a choice made in a moment that could shift slightly in one direction or another. A lesser-known detail sometimes found in personal accounts is how these games could create both camaraderie and tension. Wins and losses, even small ones, could affect mood in ways that lingered beyond the game itself. You see that balance now. A brief smile, a quiet sigh, a glance that lingers just a moment too long. You step back slightly, letting the scene continue without your presence affecting it. Nearby, another group sits with cups in hand. The scent of something stronger than coffee drifts lightly through the air. Whiskey, perhaps, though it is not openly displayed. A grounded observation from historical sources is that alcohol did find its way into many forts despite regulations. It was often limited, sometimes restricted, but rarely absent entirely. You watch as one man takes a slow sip. His expression does not change much, but there is a slight easing in his posture. Another speaks his words quieter, more reflective. The conversation here feels different. Less about the present moment, more about things beyond it. You catch fragments, mentions of places far from here, names that carry meaning for those speaking even if you do not fully recognize them. The tone is steady, but there is something beneath it, a quiet sense of distance. You move on. The sun begins to lower, though the warmth remains. Shadows stretch again, slowly reclaiming the ground. The fort shifts once more, preparing for the transition into evening. Near the barracks, you notice a different scene. Two men stand facing each other, their voices low but firm. The tension between them is subtle but present. One gestures slightly, his hand moving in a controlled arc. The other remains still listening but not yielding. You pause at a distance. The conversation does not escalate, but it does not fully resolve either. After a moment, one of them turns away, his steps measured. The other remains watching for a brief second before moving in the opposite direction. A practical insight sometimes discussed is how close quarters could amplify small disagreements. Living and working in the same space day after day left little room for distance. You understand that now. It's not constant conflict, but it is always possible. You continue walking. The yard carries a mix of these moments. Laughter from the card table, quiet conversation near the buildings, the steady continuation of tasks that do not pause simply because the day is nearing its end. You pass by a man counting coins alone. His movements are careful, his attention focused. Each coin is placed in a small stack, then adjusted slightly until it sits just right. There is a precision to it, a need for order, even in something as simple as this. A curious detail sometimes noted is how soldiers manage their limited pay, often saving small amounts over time or spending them in brief moments of opportunity. Money here is not abundant, but it is still meaningful. You move past him quietly. The air begins to cool, not sharply, but enough to notice. The warmth of the day softens, replaced by a gentler temperature that feels easier to carry. The wind returns light at first, then steady. You stop near the centre of the yard. The fort feels different at this hour, not as focused as the morning, not as intense as midday. Instead, it carries a mix of activity and rest structure and looseness all existing together. You think about what you have seen, how even in a place defined by order there are moments of chance, games where outcomes are uncertain, conversations that shift without clear direction, small disagreements that rise and fall without lasting consequence. It adds depth to the rhythm, a layer that is not controlled in the same way as the rest. Some historians continue to consider how these moments of unpredictability affected life in the fort. Whether they relieved the pressure of routine or introduced new tensions is not always clear. You can feel both. The laughter feels genuine, but so does the weight behind each coin placed on the table. You take a breath. The air carries a blend of scents again. Dustwood, a faint trace of smoke, and something else. Something quieter. The presence of people simply existing within the same space. You begin to understand that life here is not only about survival or duty, it is also about these small human moments, the ones that do not appear in records or reports, but shape the experience just as much. You turn slightly, preparing to move on. The light continues to fade, the shadows growing longer, the fort easing into its next phase. And as you step forward, you carry with you another piece of what this place truly is. Not just a system, but a collection of lives intersecting in quiet, complex ways. You feel the evening settle in more fully now, the warmth of the day slipping away in slow, quiet layers. The air cools against your skin, not sharply, but with a steady persistence that reminds you how quickly conditions can change out here. The fort adjusts with it. Movements become more contained, fires attended more carefully, doors close sooner. The rhythm does not stop, but it shifts into something tighter, more inward. You notice it in the way people prepare. Near one of the buildings, a small stack of firewood is being sorted. Pieces are chosen with care not simply for size, but for how they will burn. Some are set aside, others are carried toward the barracks or the kitchens where warmth will be needed through the night. A well-established reality of frontier life is that fuel was as important as food during colder months. Wood once gathered had to be used wisely as supplies could run low quickly, especially in harsh weather. You step closer to one of the fires. The flames move gently, not large but steady. They give off a soft heat that spreads outward in a narrow circle. You extend your hand slightly, feeling the warmth reach your skin. It is enough, but only just. You begin to understand that warmth here is not something taken for granted. It is something maintained, protected, and shared. A man nearby adjusts a log, pushing it slightly deeper into the fire. Sparks rise briefly, then fade into the darkening air. He watches for a moment, ensuring the flame catches properly, then steps back. There is a quiet attentiveness in the action. Nothing is wasted. You move on. The barracks door opens and closes more frequently. Now people stepping in and out carrying small items. Blankets, extra clothing, anything that might make the night more manageable. Inside, the air feels different again. Warmer but also heavier. The space holds the heat, but it also holds everything else. The smell of wool leather and bodies pressed closer together for warmth. It is not unpleasant, but it is noticeable. You find your bunk. The blanket rests where you left it, folded neatly. You lift it, feeling its weight. It is thicker than it first appeared, though not enough to fully block the cold that will come later. You sit. The wood beneath you creaks softly, a familiar sound now. You remove your boots slowly, setting them beneath the bed. The routine feels natural, as if it has already become part of you. A lesser-known detail is how soldiers often layered their clothing at night, wearing more than they might during the day in order to stay warm. It was not comfortable in the usual sense, but it was effective. You consider that, then adjust your clothing slightly, preparing for the drop in temperature. Around you, others do the same. Movements are quiet, unhurried. There is no need for instruction. Each person understands what is required based on experience rather than explanation. You lie back. The mattress shifts beneath you, the straw inside settling into a shape that now feels more familiar than before. You pull the blanket up, tucking it around your shoulders, creating a small space of warmth that you can hold on to. The room fills gradually, not with noise but with presence, breathing, small movements, the occasional murmur. Each one adds to the sense that you are not alone even in rest. Outside, the wind picks up slightly. You hear it move along the walls, pressing gently against the structure. It finds its way through small gaps, carrying with it the coolness of the night. The building holds most of it back, but not all. You feel a faint draft. You adjust your position, turning slightly, pulling the blanket closer. The movement helps, though it does not remove the sensation entirely. A practical observation often discussed is how winter conditions in these forts could be difficult to manage. Insulation was limited and temperatures could drop significantly. Even inside comfort was relative. You breathe slowly, letting your body settle. The warmth from earlier fades, gradually replaced by a cooler stillness that feels sharper against your skin. But within the blanket, a small pocket of heat remains enough to keep the chill at bay. Nearby, someone shifts, the sound of fabric moving against itself, followed by a quiet exhale. Another adjusts their position, the bunk creaking softly in response. These sounds no longer interrupt. They belong. You close your eyes. The darkness feels deeper tonight. The lantern light dimmed earlier, leaving only faint outlines of shapes in the room. It encourages stillness, a kind of quiet that does not demand attention. Your thoughts slow. You think briefly of the fire outside, the careful way it was tended, the importance of each piece of wood, the way warmth had to be created, maintained and protected. It mirrors something else. The routines here, the small actions repeated each day, each one contributing to a larger sense of stability. Some historians continue to explore how people adapted to these conditions over time. Whether the cold became easier to bear or simply more familiar is not always clear. You begin to feel that familiarity now. Not comfort exactly, but acceptance. Your breathing steadies. The sounds around you soften further, blending into a quiet rhythm that feels almost like a gentle pulse. The wind continues outside, steady but not overwhelming. overwhelming. You drift. The chill at the edges of your blanket remains, but it no longer demands your focus. It becomes part of the background, like the sounds, like the movement of others. You settle deeper. The fort, with all its routines and quiet challenges, holds you within its structure. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. And as you let that feeling carry you toward rest, you understand something simple. Warmth here is not constant, but it is enough. You wake to heat before you fully wake to sound. It rests on your skin in a way that feels heavier than the cold did the night before. Not sharp, not biting, but constant. The air inside the barracks is already warmed, holding on to yesterday's sun, as if it never quite left. You open your eyes slowly. The light is brighter this morning, pushing through the small openings in the walls with a clarity that feels immediate. There's no gentle transition here. The day arrives fully formed. You sit up. The blanket that kept you warm now feels unnecessary. You push it aside, letting the air reach your arms, your face. It does not cool you as much as you expect. Around you others are already moving. The pace feels different. Slightly quicker, though not rushed. There is an awareness of the heat that shapes each action, even in these early moments. You step outside. The sunlight meets you at once. It stretches across the yard without interruption, reflecting off the pale ground and the wooden surfaces of the buildings. The shadows are shorter than you remember at this hour, as if the light has claimed more space more quickly. A commonly recognized pattern of life on the plains is the intensity of summer heat. Without trees or natural cover, forts were exposed to direct sunlight for most of the day, making shade a valuable and limited resource. You feel that exposure now. The air is still. Not completely, but enough that the warmth settles rather than moves. It wraps around you, pressing gently but persistently. You walk toward the center of the yard. Already people are adjusting. Hats pulled lower. Movements kept efficient, avoiding unnecessary effort. The rhythm of the day remains, but it bends slightly under the weight of the heat. Near the water barrels, a small line forms earlier than usual. You join it. The bucket feels heavier today, or perhaps your arm simply notices the effort more. You lift it carefully, bringing it to the basin. The water inside is cool but not cold, still it offers relief. You dip the cloth, press it against your face. The sensation is immediate. A brief easing, a moment where the heat pulls back just slightly. You hold it there a second longer than you did yesterday. Then step aside. A lesser-known detail from accounts of frontier life is how people adapted small habits to manage the heat. Wet cloths, shaded rest pacing of work. These adjustments did not remove the heat, but they made it bearable. You begin to understand that. It's not about avoiding discomfort. It is about managing it. You move toward the shade of a building. The difference is noticeable, though not dramatic. The direct pressure of the sun eases, replaced by a softer warmth that feels easier to carry. A man nearby sits with his back against the wall, his hat tilted forward to shield his face. He is not asleep, but resting, conserving energy in a way that feels deliberate. You pause for a moment, then continue. The fort carries on. Work does not stop, but it shifts. Tasks are performed with a certain economy of movement. Less talking, more doing, each action measured to avoid unnecessary strain. You hear a distant rumble. At first it blends with the other sounds, but as you focus it becomes clearer. Low, continuous, not coming from within the fort. You look toward the horizon. Clouds, darkening, gathering in uneven shapes that rise above the flat line of the land. They move slowly but with the purpose. A grounded observation from historical records is how quickly weather could change on the plains. Storms could form with little warning, bringing sudden shifts in wind temperature and visibility. You watch. The clouds build, the air changes. A slight movement begins barely noticeable at first, then stronger. The wind returns, carrying with it a different kind of energy, cooler but also charged. You feel it against your skin. A shift. Around you people notice. Movements adjust again, items are secured, loose objects gathered, doors checked. The rhythm of the fort adapts not in panic but in preparation. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in diaries is how quickly dust could rise ahead of a storm. The wind lifting it from the ground, turning the air thick, reducing visibility in moments. You see the first signs now. Fine particles lifting, swirling lightly across the yard. The light changes as they pass through it, softening the brightness, creating a muted glow. The wind strengthens. It moves through the fort with more force, pressing against walls, rattling loose edges. The sound grows, filling the spaces between buildings. You step back towards the barracks. The door opens and closes quickly as others move inside. Not everyone, but enough to shift the balance of activity. The open yard feels less stable now, more exposed. You pause at the threshold. The sky darkens further. The clouds gather overhead, thick and layered. The air carries a new scent, earth lifted and moving mixed with the faint hint of rain that has not yet arrived. A reflective point often raised in studies of frontier life is how weather shaped daily routines as much as any human decision. Plans adjusted, tasks delayed or accelerated, all in response to forces beyond control. You feel that clearly now. The wind rises again, stronger this time. Dust moves more heavily, blurring the edges of the building, softening outlines into shifting shapes. You step inside, letting the door close behind you. The difference is immediate. The sound changes, muffled but still present. The movement of air less direct but still felt through the structure. You stand for a moment, listening. The storm builds outside its presence, undeniable, yet held at a distance by the walls around you. You realize then that life here is not only shaped by routine, but by interruption. By moments like this, where the expected flow of the day is altered not by choice, but by circumstance. You take a breath. The air inside feels warmer again, but stable, predictable in a way that the outside no longer is. You move deeper into the barracks. The rhythm will return. It always does. But for now, you stand within this pause, aware of the forces that move beyond the walls, shaping everything in ways both visible and unseen. You remain inside for a moment, listening as the wind presses and releases against the wooden walls in uneven waves. The storm does not arrive all at once. It gathers, shifts, tests the edge of the fort before committing fully. You feel that hesitation in the air, as if the land itself is deciding how much to give. Then slowly it passes, not with a dramatic ending, but with a gradual easing. The wind softens, the dust settles back to the ground. The light, once dimmed, begins to return, filtering through the gaps in the structure with a calmer tone. You step outside again. The yard looks slightly different, not changed in any obvious way, but touched. The ground shows new patterns where the wind moved across it. Small items have shifted position. A bucket lies on its side, quickly righted by someone passing by. The rhythm resumes, but not exactly where it left off. You notice movement near the far side of the fort. A line of wagons stands just inside the gate, their shapes familiar yet distinct from the one that brought mail earlier. These are larger, more heavily loaded, their wooden frames reinforce their wheels thick with layers of dried mud and dust. Supply wagons. A foundational truth of frontier life is that forts depended on long supply lines that stretched across vast distances. These routes connected them to towns, depots, and other posts, but they were often unreliable, shaped by weather, terrain, and timing. You walk toward them. The air carries the scent of wood canvas and the faint trace of whatever has been packed inside. Men move around the wagons with focused attention, unloading items one by one. Each piece is handled with care, as if its value extends beyond its immediate use. You watch as a crate is lowered to the ground. It lands with a soft thud, the sound absorbed quickly by the packed earth. A man kneels beside it, checking its contents before signaling to another. The process is quiet, efficient, built on repetition. A smaller detail sometimes noted in historical accounts is how these supply trains often travelled in groups known as wagon trains for protection and efficiency. The journey itself could take weeks, sometimes longer, depending on conditions. You glance at the wheels. They carry the story of that journey. Layers of dried earth, small cracks, signs of wear that speak to distance rather than damage. You move closer to one of the wagons. The canvas covering is pulled back slightly, revealing sacks, tools, and a few tightly packed barrels. The arrangement is deliberate, each item placed to maximize space and stability. You reach out, resting your hand lightly against the wooden side. It feels warm from the sun, the surface rough beneath your fingers. A reminder that these objects have been moving, carrying weight across the same land you now stand within. Nearby, a man speaks to another in low tones. You catch fragments of the conversation, mentions of delays, of a river crossing that took longer than expected, of a wheel that needed repair along the way. A thoughtful point raised in historical studies is how fragile these supply systems could be. A single broken wheel, a change in weather, or a missing route could disrupt the entire chain. You can see that fragility now, even in the presence of abundance. You step back as another crate is lifted. The men work steadily, their movements coordinated without the need for constant instruction. There is a shared understanding of what must be done, shaped by experience rather than command. You follow the path of one item as it is carried away. From the wagon to the storage building where it is placed alongside others, each one adding to the fort's reserves. The process is not rushed, but it is continuous. You notice how everything flows. Arrival, unloading, storage. A cycle that repeats, linking the outside world to this enclosed space. A curious detail sometimes mentioned is how certain items were more anticipated than others. Coffee, for example, held a particular importance, valued not only for its practical use but for the comfort it provided. You imagine that now. The small lift it might bring to someone's day. You move along the line of wagons. Each one carries something slightly different. Some hold food, others tools or materials. A few contain items you cannot easily identify, wrapped and secured against the journey. You realize how much of life here depends on what arrives in these moments, not just in quantity but in timing. You step aside as a group passes, carrying a longer object between them. It requires careful handling, their steps coordinated to keep it balanced. They move toward a building where it will be stored or perhaps used. The fort absorbs the arrival. Quietly, efficiently, you pause near the gate. Beyond it, the land stretches out once more, the signs of the storm already fading. The horizon looks unchanged, though you know it has shifted in ways that are not immediately visible. The wagons came from there, from that distance. Some historians continue to explore how these long journeys shaped the people who made them. The time spent travelling, the challenges faced along the way, the knowledge gained through movement rather than stillness. You consider that. How different it must feel to be on the road compared to being within these walls. You turn back. The fort continues its work, integrating what has arrived into its daily rhythm. Nothing is wasted, nothing is overlooked. You walk slowly through the yard. The sounds return to their steady pattern. The movements regain their familiar pace. The brief interruption of the storm and the arrival of the wagons become part of the larger flow. You take a breath. The air carries a mix of scents again. Dustwood, the faint trace of supplies newly opened. It feels layered but balanced. You understand now that this place is sustained by connection. Not constant, not immediate, but reliable enough to continue. And as you step forward, rejoining the rhythm that defines this place, you carry that understanding with you. Another link in the chain. Another quiet truth of how life here continues day after day. You linger near the gate a moment longer, the last wagon settling into place behind you. The sounds of unloading fading into the wider rhythm of the fort. The air feels calmer now after the storm's brief passage, clearer somehow, as if the land has exhaled, but something else settles in its place. A quiet alertness. It does not arrive all at once. It builds in small ways. A glance held a second longer. A pause in conversation that feels just slightly extended. The kind of awareness that moves through a group without needing to be spoken aloud. You begin to notice it. Near the stables, two men speak in lower tones than before. Their words are careful, their posture attentive. One gestures faintly toward the outer wall, then lets his hand fall back to his side. You do not hear the full exchange, but you sense the meaning. A grounded reality often reflected in historical accounts is how rumours and uncertainty could shape daily life in frontier forts as much as confirmed events. Information travelled unevenly and not every report could be verified. You walk slowly across the yard. The routine continues, but it carries a different texture now. Tasks are still performed, but with an added layer of attention. People look up more often. Movements pause briefly before continuing. You follow that pattern without thinking. Looking, listening. The sounds remain familiar. Boots on packed earth. The quiet murmur of voices. The occasional creak of wood. but now each one feels slightly sharper, as if your senses have adjusted to pick up more detail. You hear something beyond the wall, faint, difficult to place. You stop, focus. It could be wind, it could be something else. The distance makes it uncertain, the sound blending with the natural movement of the land. You wait a moment longer, then it fades. A small curious detail sometimes noted in personal writings is how often perceived threats turned out to be ordinary occurrences, a distant animal, a shifting branch. The mind given enough quiet fills the space with possibilities. You begin to understand that, the uncertainty, the way it lingers even when nothing confirms it. You move toward a group near the center of the yard. Their conversation is hushed but not secretive. Words about a report, about something seen earlier, beyond the usual range. No clear conclusion, only the sharing of observation. You listen without interrupting. An interesting perspective discussed by historians is how information in these environments often passed through multiple layers before settling into something accepted. Each retelling could shift, slightly shaped by memory and interpretation. You hear that process now. The same detail described in slightly different ways. Not conflicting, but not identical either. You step back. The sky above has cleared the clouds from earlier dispersed, leaving a wide stretch of blue that feels almost too calm. The contrast with the quiet tension below is noticeable. You walk toward the wall, not directly to the top, but close enough to feel its presence beside you. The wood stands firm, its surface marked by time and weather. It separates you from what lies beyond, but it does not remove the awareness of it. You place your hand against it briefly. The texture is warm from the sun grounding in its solidity. Beyond it, the land continues, unchanged in appearance, uncertain in meaning. A practical observation often made in historical studies is how the vastness of the plains could create both a sense of openness and vulnerability. With little to block the view, anything approaching could be seen from a distance. But distance also meant time for uncertainty to grow. You feel that balance now. You step back into the yard. A figure moves quickly across your path heading toward the gate. Not running, but moving with purpose. Another follows. Then another. The motion draws attention, but does not yet create alarm. You turn slightly, watching. The gate opens just enough to allow a small group through. They step outside their posture, steady, their focus directed outward. A patrol. Not unusual, but in this moment it feels connected to the quiet tension that has been building. You watch until they pass beyond the walls, then the gate closes again. The sound echoes briefly, then fades. You realize that much of life here exists in this space between certainty and doubt, between what is known and what is suspected, between routine and the possibility of interruption. Some scholars continue to examine how this constant state of readiness affected those who lived in these forts. Whether it created resilience or simply a persistent low-level strain is not always clear. You can feel both. The structure holds, but the awareness never fully leaves. You take a slow breath. The air feels steady again, though your senses remain alert. The fort continues its work, the rhythm reasserting itself, pulling attention back to what is immediate and necessary. You move with it, allowing the moment to pass without holding onto it too tightly. The tension fades not completely, but enough to return to the familiar pattern of the day. And as you walk across the yard once more, the sounds settling into their steady flow, you carry with you another quiet understanding. That life here is shaped not only by what happens, but by what might happen and how you learn to live within that space. You feel the tension ease as the day stretches toward its later hours, the quiet alertness of earlier, dissolving back into something more familiar. The fort exhales not in relief exactly, but in continuation. Nothing dramatic has happened, and yet something has still changed. You notice it in yourself, the way your steps fall more naturally on the packed earth, the way your eyes no longer search every corner without purpose, the way the sounds blend together into something recognizable rather than overwhelming. You are not new here anymore, not completely. The sun lowers slowly, its light softening once again. Shadows lengthen, returning to the shapes you first noticed when you arrived. The cycle feels complete in a way that is difficult to define but easy to feel. Near the barracks, a small group gathers. Their belongings are laid out beside them, not much. A few personal items carefully arranged, a folded blanket, a small bundle tied with cloth, a tin cup polished more than necessary. You pause, watching. One of the men adjusts the strap of a bag, pulling it tighter, then loosening it slightly as if testing how it will sit when carried. Another checks the contents of his bundle, his hands moving slowly, deliberately, as if committing each item to memory. They are preparing to leave. A commonly recognized part of life in frontier forts is that movement in and out was constant. Soldiers were reassigned, discharged, or sent on extended patrols. The population of the fort was never entirely fixed. You step a little closer. Their expressions are calm but focused, not distant but not fully present either. There is a sense of transition, of standing between one place and another. You wonder what it feels like to leave a place like this, to carry its routines with you even as you step away from them. A smaller, often overlooked detail is how personal belongings remained minimal. There was little space and even less need for excess. What was kept had meaning, not just function. You notice that now. Each item chosen, each one important. One of the men looks up, briefly meeting your gaze. There is no need for words. Just a small nod, an acknowledgement of shared sales, even if only for a short time. You return it. He looks back down, continuing his preparations. You step away. The moment feels private, even though it takes place in the open. You walk toward the center of the yard. The fort continues its steady motion, but there is a subtle shift in the air. A sense of endings, even small ones, woven into the routine. You pass by the training ground. It is empty now. The marks of earlier drills remain in the dirt, faint impressions that will fade with time. The absence of movement makes the space feel larger, quieter. You pause, thinking about how quickly activity becomes memory here, how each day leaves its trace then gives way to the next. A reflective point often explored in historical writing is how individuals experience time in these environments. Whether days felt repetitive or distinct, whether change was noticed or simply absorbed. You feel both possibilities. The pattern is steady, but each moment carries its own detail. You move on. Near the gate, the same group you noticed earlier now stands ready. Their belongings secured, their posture steady. The gate opens slowly, the sound of wood moving against wood marking the transition once again. They step forward, not hurried, not hesitant, simply moving. You watch as they pass beyond the walls. Their figures grow smaller with each step, blending into the wider landscape that stretches out beyond the fort. The horizon receives them without resistance, just as it did for the wagons earlier. A thoughtful observation sometimes raised is how departure could feel both freeing and uncertain. Leaving the structure of the fort meant entering a space with fewer boundaries but also fewer guarantees. You can imagine that. The openness, the risk, the change. The gate closes behind them. The sound echoes briefly, then fades. The fort returns to itself. You turn away. The yard feels slightly quieter, though nothing has truly changed. The same buildings stand, the same routines continue. And yet there is a sense that something has shifted, even if only in a small way. You walk slowly. Your steps carry you back towards the barracks, though you do not enter immediately. Instead, you pause outside, looking across the space you have come to know. The water barrels, the training ground, the workshops, each one holds a piece of what you have experienced. You take a breath. The air feels familiar now, not because it has changed, but because you have. A commonly discussed idea among historians is how adaptation occurs gradually, often without conscious awareness. People adjust to new environments not through sudden realization but through repeated experience. You recognize that in yourself. The fort no longer feels like something you are entering. It feels like something you are part of. You step inside. The barracks holds its usual presence. The dim light, the quiet movements, the steady rhythm of rest preparing to begin again. You find your bunk. The wood creaks softly as you sit, the sound now almost comforting. You remove your boots, setting them in their place, the routine complete without thought. You lie back. The blanket rests over you, its weight familiar, its warmth enough. You close your eyes. The sounds settle around you once more, breathing, small shifts, the quiet continuation of life within these walls. And as you drift toward rest, you carry with you the understanding that this place with all its routines and quiet moments has become something more than just a setting. It has become part of your rhythm, part of how you move, how you think, how you rest. And even as change continues around you, as people arrive and leave, as days repeat and shift, that rhythm remains steady, enduring, yours for as long as you remain here. You wake before the bugle this time, not fully alert, not fully asleep, but resting in that quiet space where the body seems to know what comes next before the mind does. The air is still cooler than it was at midday, carrying a softness that feels almost deliberate. You open your eyes slowly. The barracks rests in a calm you recognize now. The shapes of bunks, the faint outlines of others still lying in place, the quiet rhythm of breathing that fills the room without drawing attention. You do not move, Rie. There is no need. Outside, the earliest light begins to form, not bright, not defined, but present. A gradual lifting of darkness that does not interrupt, only replaces. You listen. The fort is not yet awake, but it is no longer fully at rest. A small shift here, a distant movement there, the beginning of another day arriving in the same quiet way it always does. You sit up. The wood beneath you creaks softly, the sound blending into the stillness rather than breaking it. You pull the blanket aside, feeling the cooler air touch your arms, your face. You stand. Your movements are slower this morning, not from fatigue, but from familiarity. You know where everything is. You know what comes next. There is no uncertainty in the routine. You step outside. The yard stretches before you, washed in a pale early light that softens every edge. The buildings appear gentler at this hour, their rough surfaces less defined, their shapes more fluid. The horizon glows faintly. You walk toward the centre. The ground feels cool beneath your boots, the dust settled, the air clear. It carries the scent of earth and wood, but lighter than during the day, cleaner in a way that is difficult to describe. A broadly accepted understanding of life in these forts is that the early morning hours often brought a brief sense of calm before the demands of the day began. It was a moment where the rhythm paused just slightly before continuing. You feel that pause now. You stop, not because you must, but because it feels natural. The fort around you begins to stir. A door opens quietly. A figure steps out, stretching slightly before moving toward the water barrels. Another emerges from a different building, adjusting clothing, preparing without haste. The bugle has not yet sounded, and yet the day has begun. A small curious observation sometimes noted in historical reflections is how individuals often woke before official signals, their bodies adjusting to the routine over time. The structure of the day became internal, no longer needing to be imposed from outside. You understand that now. You are part of that rhythm. You move toward the wall, not all the way to the gate, but close enough to feel its presence again. The wood stands firm, unchanged, a steady boundary between what is within and what lies beyond. You place your hand against it briefly. The surface is cool, grounding. Beyond it, the land stretches out just as it did when you first arrived. Open, quiet, holding its distance. It has not changed, but your perception of it has. A thoughtful point often explored by historians is how places like this shaped those who lived within them, not through dramatic events, but through steady, repeated experience. You carry that, I say. Sleeping now? In small ways, in the way you move, in the way you listen, in the way you understand the space around you. The bugle sounds, clear, steady, marking the beginning of another cycle. This time it does not surprise you. You turn. Others move into the yard, their steps aligning with the familiar pattern. The lines begin to form, the routine reasserting itself without hesitation. You take your place, not as an observer, but as part of it. The day will unfold as it always does. Tasks, movement, moments of quiet, moments of attention. The rhythm will continue steady and unbroken, and you will move within it. As you stand there, the light growing stronger, the fort fully waking, you feel a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a settling. You've seen the patterns, felt the changes, understood the layers that shape this place, and now you simply exist within it. The sounds rise around you, the movement begins, the day continues, and as it does, you allow your awareness to soften, to settle into the steady flow of routine, the quiet repetition that no longer demands attention, only presence. The light grows warmer. The air steadier, the rhythm familiar, and slowly, gently you let that rhythm carry you. The edges of thought soften, the details blur. The fort remains, but it becomes less defined, more distant, as if you are stepping back from it without moving at all. The sounds fade slightly, not disappearing, just becoming quieter, less distinct. You feel the weight of the day ease, the sense of movement slow. Your breathing steadies, in then out, calm, unhurried. You remain there in that space between awareness and rest where everything continues but nothing demands your attention. The fort holds its play, the land stretches beyond, and you rest within the quiet understanding that this moment, like all the others, is part of something steady, something continuous, something that carries on whether you focus on it or not. You let go of the details, the names, the movements, the thoughts. They drift away one by one, leaving only the soft rhythm behind. And in that rhythm you find rest, a gentle, quiet rest that does not need to be earned, only accepted. The light fades from your awareness, the sounds settle into silence, and you drift, slowly, easily, into the calm, sweet dream of Reims.